Welcome back, everybody. We're talking to Imam Feisal, and we'll continue our conversation. Did you think this was going to be controversial? Were you surprised by the
Yes.
Really?
Yes. As I said, the story first came out in last December in the New York Times. No one objected.
Is it an indication that the bridges you've been building maybe aren't such strong bridges? And I know you talked about being a big bridge builder a lot. If you weren't aware that of the controversy that would follow?
Well, as I mentioned, the story first broke out in last December. It was front page news in the New York Times. No one objected to our establishing such a center. Rabbi Arthur Schneier was quoted, Rabbi Joy Levitt of the Jewish Community Center, with whom we had spoken and who welcomed the idea and has given us enormous cooperation and support in telling us what works, what doesn't work, how to do this. Because the idea of Soledad is to establish something like a Muslim Y. You have the YMCA was created 130 years ago to improve relationships between what was then called the American Protestant religions by having young men and young women, of course was separate at the time, YMCA, YWCA, come and bond by doing sports together and other programs together. It's become a worldwide phenomenon. The 92nd Street Y was the first attempt by the Jewish community to create also a center where you would create this kind of bonding. We are now today where the Jewish community and the Catholic community was maybe 70 years ago, a century ago. And this is our time and our turn to do that. A Christian friend of mine once said, I have no reason to go to a synagogue. But by going to the 92nd Street Y and by doing its programs, I've learned far more about Jewish culture, gotten to make many Jewish friends, and it has opened my eyes to many things. So we need to do something like this, because the need today is to build those types of relationships, to forge those bonds that would help us create an atmosphere of peace.
But doesn't the controversy that has happened now work against that? Isn't that exactly the opposite of what you're striving for?
In some ways, yes, but in some ways it also is a silver lining here.
How is it a silver lining?
It gives us an opportunity to speak about this subject in a manner that is sober, in a manner that is coherent, to look at what we are all about as Americans, to look about what it means to be Muslim in America, to look at how we are going to put back this genie of clash between the West and the Muslim world back into the bottle.
There are plenty of Muslims, as I've been doing research, who've said, this debate does not help us. This debate makes things more dangerous for us. This debate hurts us. What's happening at Ground Zero?
There is no doubt that this has become such a situation, and I'm deeply sensitive to that and very concerned about that. And, had I known this would happen, we certainly would never have done this.
You would never have picked that spot.
We would not have done something that would create more divisiveness.
And why is it hard to back up and say, and now that we've done it, let's undo it? Let's just say we won't. Let's pick another spot that's been offered.
As I just mentioned, our national security now hinges on how we negotiate this, how we speak about it, and what we do. It is important for us now to raise the bar on our conversation.
What's at risk when you say national security?
As I mentioned, because if we move, that means the radicals have shaped the discourse. The radicals will shape the discourse on both sides. And those of us who are moderates on both sides, you see, Soledad, the battlefront is not between Muslims and non-Muslims. The real battlefront is between moderates on all sides of all the faith traditions and the radicals on all sides. The radicals actually feed off each other and in some kind of a existential way need each other. And the more that the radicals are able to control the discourse on one side, it strengthens the radicals on the other side and vice versa. We have to turn this around.
Let me play a question from an iReporter. Her name is Kathy Cordson and she's in Fullerton, California. Let's listen.
Why couldn't you find another place? I just feel like there's an ulterior motive, and I know it's probably wrong, but that's how I feel, and I think a lot of Americans feel that way too. That you want to upset us for some reason. Is that true?
No, it's not true. It is not our intention to create more conflict. This is our intention to say we as Muslims, we as American Muslims, want to contribute to the rebuilding of Lower Manhattan. We want to enhance relationships with our American non-Muslim fellow countrymen. We want to forge better relationships, and we want to be part of the solution. Not only want to be, we are ready, we are willing, and we are able to be part of the solution. If the problem is perceived to lie in the Muslim community, which definitely a certain amount of that is, if the problem is perceived to be a matter of religion, then the solution also lies in our being engaged in this process. We are not going to achieve peace between the West and the Muslim world without the engagement of Muslims and Western Muslims in particular.
It sounds like you're saying we're going to force a peaceful option. So I'll leave it there for a moment. We've got to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about that on the other side.
Okay, thank you.
Back in a moment. You can see the police officer there. That is the location of this proposed Islamic center. I was there yesterday. People carrying placards are walking by. We're back with Imam Feisal. Nice to have you. Thank you, Feisal. Excuse me. Nice to have you. Wouldn't it further the goal of peacemaking? And you've talked a lot about it. To move it. Why is that an option that's off the table now?
Nothing is off the table, Soledad.
That's not off the table.
But we are consulting and talking to various people about how to do this so that we negotiate the best and the safest option. As I mentioned...
What are those conversations like? What's on the table?
The biggest issue is a national security issue.
How do you pull out without looking like you've lost?
Without making it look both in this country and in the Muslim world. You must remember, Soledad, and Americans must remember that what we do is watched all over the world. All over the world. And we are very engaged with the Muslim world. Very engaged. And our security is really number one. Our national security, our personal security is extremely important. And this issue has become now a national security issue. And therefore, in our conversations, in our decision-making process, we have to weigh many, many factors, and that has been dominant among them.
Is there a middle ground that has you pull out of the center and do something else? That's what it sounds like you're saying.
We are discussing many things right now, but you know, we haven't found yet an option that would work in a safe way.
What you're considering it?
As I said, we consider everything in life, but we have to be very cautious here because the voices of the radicals have ratcheted up, and we must make sure that the moderates take over the conversation.
In your op-ed in the New York Times, a lot of what you talked about were interfaith worship centers. It's a change from what was on the website originally. Is this a change in the face of the controversy? Is this the negotiation?
When I founded the Cordova Initiative after 9/11, in response to a perennial question was, how can we fix this relationship between the United States and the Muslim world? I found the Cordova Initiative as a multi-faith and a multinational initiative because it became very clear and very apparent that if we were going to do this, we have to have Muslims and non-Muslims in this country and internationally cooperating together on addressing the fundamental causes that have caused this and are continuously fueling this.
But the controversy itself, though, right? Isn't that causing, to some degree, an instability and a risk of safety? I mean, there's an address now that has become the flashpoint for a lot of anger. Isn't that a risk to Muslims and Americans?
There is a certain anger here, no doubt. But if we don't do this right, anger will explode in the Muslim world. If this is not handled correctly, this crisis could become much bigger than the Danish cartoon crisis, which resulted in attacks on Danish embassies in various parts of the Muslim world, and we have a much larger footprint in the Muslim world. if we don't handle this crisis correctly, it could become something which could really become very, 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 very dangerous indeed.
Do you ask yourself, how did you miss that? I mean, it's been your life mission, and you and I have spoken in the past years, to build bridges and reach out, and yet, given what you know now, would you have built?
As I mentioned it, this story is not new. People knew about it.
Right, but given what you know now, would you have said, listen, let's not do it there? Because it sounds like you're saying, in retrospect, wouldn't have done it.
Well, yes.
You would not have done it.
If I knew that this would happen, this would cause this kind of pain, I wouldn't have done it. My life has been devoted to peacemaking, Soledad.
There are so many people who say, so if you're saying it was a mistake, then why can't you get out of it and not do it?
Because we have to now make sure that whatever we do actually results in greater peace, not in greater conflict.
Many of the things that you've said over the last couple of years have been parsed, as you well know. I'm sure you've read yourself over and over again over the years. When we come back in the next break, we're going to talk about some of the things you've said. A 60 Minutes interview with Ed Bradley. We'll talk a little bit about Hamas and your position on Hamas as well, right after the short break.
By all means.